Welcome everyone to this roundtable session about architecture in Android. My name is Jose Alcérreca and I work at Google as a developer programs engineer in the developer relations team. This session is going to be somewhat experimental. It's not really a Q&A or a fireside chat where the audience ask the members how they would redesign Android again. We're just going to chat and hopefully disagree on topics related to architecture. So why are we doing this? For me, the best takeaways from conferences are the discussions that happen between the sessions, and they're never recorded. So the idea of this session is to bring those conversations or have those conversations in front of an audience. For that, we have an absolutely incredible panel with us today. From right to left, we have Yiğit Boyar from the Android framework team, Mike Nakimovich from the New York Times, Lucia Payo from N26, Israel Camacho from Periscope, Mike Evans from Twitter. Wow, seriously? Michael Bailey, from American Express, Anis Davis from Off-Grid Electric, and this guy is Jake Wharton from the Android framework team working on Kotlin. So please join me in welcoming all of them with a round of applause first. All right, thank you for coming. We don't have much time. We normally would do this in like 2 hours, but we only have 40 minutes. So we have like 4.5 minutes per topic. I want to target 8 different topics. So let's start right away. The first one is about the architecture components. So it would be for Yiğit, but feel free to jump in at any time. So with the release of the architecture components, it looks like Google is abandoning old APIs like loaders and recommending patterns that are much less coupled with the framework, which is good, but what happens with these APIs? Are we abandoning them? And I'm talking about classes like sync adapters, loaders, async tasks, etc. When do they make sense?
I mean, I wish we could, we cannot. This is like, Chet has this analogy. He says, like, APIs are worse than kids. Your kids at least go to college. Like, your APIs are always there. So we'll have to support them, but I think it's not what we think. It's about like, are people using these APIs? If people are using those APIs, they are here to stay. And if people are not using them, they will just fade out in the history. They will probably still be in your Android jar. But yeah, I mean, like we learn, everyone learns. We made some mistakes. We are trying to reiterate. We are making new mistakes, and like 5 years from today, realize most of these things were wrong. Things will change. But yeah, I mean, those things are here to stay as long as someone is using them.
So are you guys still using loaders, async task? Have you moved on?
Yeah, I'm personally not using them much, to be honest. I usually, people don't recommend to use them, like the community, and like using other solutions like RxJava, for instance, for executing async tasks and stuff like that.
Any other?
We weren't using those API loaders or async tasks anyway, so it's great to have a solution and new APIs that are supported by Google, and we know that are going to be supported going forward. And it gives you something across companies where you can interview a developer, and now you can be more confident when you ask about these APIs because they're part of Android now. They're part of the first-party solution, so it helps set a foundation for discussions to have these new architecture components.
All right, cool. So the architecture components are designed for beginners and intermediate developers, basically. But we've seen many experts also using them, even though they're not stable yet. So do you plan or have you used the components in production? And this question could be for Anis, maybe?
So I haven't used it in production yet, but I would feel comfortable at least using Room in production. And I've spent a lot of time looking at that API, and I'm pretty impressed with the work there. I think for new developers, it does make a lot of sense, especially if you think about things like cursors and everything else that went along with like raw SQLite. Just avoid it, and most people already have been doing that with like Realm and Cupboard and all these other ORM solutions. So I personally would recommend using Room in production. Migrations are a little bit weird right now to me, but I'm confident in the future for that particular aspect of architecture components.
Okay, are you waiting for them to become stable? Probably.
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
And then I probably would migrate off my current solution happily, actually.
Cool. Any other experience with the architectural components from the rest of the panel?
So we don't use them at work, but at this point I feel if I was to start a new app, it would be using architecture components. It would be using view models. If it was something that didn't do a lot of data transformations, it feels like the live data stuff is good enough for what it is. And what really surprises me is that when this stuff came out, it gave me a different feeling than reading about loaders or reading about async tasks. This was written better than I thought I could write this myself, and it was written by members that used to be members of the community that were developers sitting there. That it's incredible to see code that is now coming out of Google for application development that is written by people that have been writing end user apps and have been looking for the tools to fill these gaps. That absolutely, it's supported by some of the best engineers we have in the community, and it's really exciting for me to be able to not have to use open source tools, but be able to use the real components.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2017, right? Everyone has learned.
This is actually like, it's not obvious when you don't work in the framework. And then when I joined the framework team, I was like, oh, like these people know everything. Actually, they know something else. Like they don't really know, because it's not my job. Like I'm not writing an app daily. And like architecture components was quite experimental for us. We work with the community like from the very early days. Like some people here in this room, they have seen the very, very early reincarnations of those APIs, like when we're trying to do what to do. I think that helped a lot. Like we learned the lesson. We don't know much, but like people are willing to help, and we are willing to listen, and it turned out to be good. I think we'll do more of it.
So what's the next component? Okay. Page list. Right. So life cycles are part of the architecture components, and they've been promoted to stable and now released as part of the support library 26.1.0, right? Because to make things easy, right?
Why not? Yeah.
So should we expect all the Android libraries to be lifecycle aware from now on? And this might be good for Jake to take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think before you get to that, you want to try as hard as possible to not have to care about life cycles. A library will be greatly simplified if the fact that a life cycle is happening doesn't affect anything the library needs to care about. So either it's fully synchronous or happening completely outside the life cycle scope, so like the process scope. But if you have to do something where you're tied to UI or you're tied to a life cycle, then it is nice having that standard set of interfaces that, if then applied across a bunch of libraries, can all be composed together and kind of just work. And so it seems like something that has been solved a bunch of different ways historically in the past. And so now having these unified interfaces is probably a good idea to look into adding it to things that are fundamentally tied to life cycles, but have some like asynchrony in them, such that they need to automatically do something when a life cycle happens.
Any other takers?
Yeah, definitely. Finally, we have that life cycle aware implementation that it's this contract that it's part of the Android spec, and I would say, again, it's pretty similar to what happened with New York Times and what Mike said. Like most of us that we've been doing Android development already have our custom solution, which maybe is not as good, kind of works. And for us to start moving to that lifecycle aware in the app compat is going to take some time, but it's definitely the way to go. So if you're starting, don't make your own solution. Just use this, which works, and it's a solved problem.
Cool. So the guide to app architecture that we released recommends using view models, and it talks about view models a lot. There's a view models provider, but it doesn't explicitly say MVVM model view model. Can we say Yiğit that that's the way to go from now on? Is there a good case for presenters? What about the rest of Flux, Redux, MVI, all that?
But I mean, so there's some internal joke about this. Like when Jose showed this, like I will gladly answer that. Like no, there's a class view model because the description of the class for what it does really match the view model. That has nothing to do with MVVM, and we're not telling you to use or not to use MVVM. In fact, in the guide, the guide never mentions it because we were super scared. Like when we started this project, and then when we wanted to give guidance, like some people internally said, you know what, we should just pick one of these. That will be really easy for people. And that's some idea we entertained, and I was looking at all the examples on GitHub. Like, you should just go and check the implementation of MVVM or MVP or like whatever. Every single project implements it differently. Like everybody has their own understanding, and like us trying to pick just doesn't make sense. Like it's not even true. Like I cannot advocate for it. I can easily, if you pick A, I can come with B and then argue that B is like a lot better than yours. So the idea is not that. The idea is all like, if you don't know or if you're not interested, and then there you go. Here is like some guides you can follow and it's going to work. Because like Jose mentioned initially that like architecture components tries to match everybody. Like one of the people we interviewed like a year ago while we're designing these components, he said he's an engineer. And then he said, I don't want to deal with technical things. I just want to deliver the product. Like that person should be able to write this thing as well as like people here who really want to do it the way they want to do it. So we don't care whatever architecture you choose.
Doesn't matter, like the architecture you choose. We just want to ship features,
I kind of want that to be a takeaway from this panel. But I'd like to ask all of you, like, what's your pattern if you were to start a new app right now? Like, what do you like nowadays? Which probably will be different in 2 months, but.
I think to use whatever you really like. The good part about the architecture components is that you don't have to use all of them. You can, like, if you really love your MVP pattern and you don't want to give it up or something, you can just use Room or just use live data or mix and match. So, like, you don't want to go MVVM or whatever, just use the parts you do like.
I think one of the key things that Yiğit said that may have gotten buried in there is that even with MVP and MVVM, the definitions are very fluid. And it's not, we tend to kind of conflate them, which is a good thing. The use of MVP doesn't preclude the use of a view model, right? Like a presenter exposing a view model to the view is like something you should be doing or something that's recommended and simplifies things for testability. So we don't call it MVVMP, we just call it MVP, but there still can be a view model in there.
Would it be MVP VM or MVVMP? This is important. Yes. Okay. Cool.
It can be MVV whatever. It doesn't matter if it just works for you, right? And then you can iterate over it and make it to work for you. And what they said, like, this is like cooking. Your architecture, you cook it in one way, we cook it another way, and if it works for you, that's fine.
Yeah. Any other comment about like trendy patterns? No? Okay.
JavaScript.
All right. So, Kotlin. It allows for more concise and cleaner code sometimes. Does this impact the architecture of the app? Or can it impact the architecture of an app? Were we using some patterns in Java because they made the code cleaner, and maybe now they're not necessary with Kotlin? Is it going to affect anyway, Jake?
I don't think it will fundamentally affect architectures. architectures are usually used for things that are separate from the language in which they're implemented. So you think of like testability, ease of being able to add new features or change existing ones, being able to decouple responsibility. Like all these things are not tied fundamentally to a language. And so in theory, I mean, Kotlin is relatively young, and so I guess we still need to find this out. But in theory, and even just trying to think about it, I can't see a reason why you would fundamentally change an architecture for a language. If anything, it should just make some of the architectures usually come with inherent overhead in terms of the amount of code you have to write or a little bit of boilerplate to hook things up. And so if anything, hopefully the more expressive language will help and allow architectures to be easier to use and implement. So if anything, it will just kind of reinforce the ones that are already there. At least that's what I think.
In our application, we use MVP, which I actually really like. And we're about 60% Kotlin right now, and it's basically the same, except, shorter. So I don't see how that would affect the overall architecture, but I do think it does impact new developers as to what should I learn now. That's one thing I hear a lot from people is, well, should I learn about view model and live data, or should I learn about Kotlin? And it's not really an either or, but everyone doesn't have the opportunity to just learn endlessly. They have to focus on features. So I think it would be interesting, whatever we do with architecture components, to keep putting out Java and Kotlin so that people can feel comfortable slowly learning Kotlin and adopting that sort of mindset.
Mm.
The only place I've really seen is we're all Kotlin noobs too, and we're just starting to get into it. And the only place I've seen that, it's not really architecture, but utility classes are the big things that we saw as being different between Java and Kotlin, where now we were localizing things more. We stopped having our activity and our date utils, and we can actually do extensions locally to where code is. So that kind of goes in line with what Anis was saying, that it's less code. You're still going to have these large overarching architectures, but you just may be able to now have utility functions or something else that is going to be on the classes that are using them, rather than needing to have these catch-all God objects that you're now just dumping into your utility folders.
Yeah, probably unrelated to architecture, but do we need an effective Kotlin, or can we just apply the same patterns?
I think if you read Effective Java, Kotlin out of the box does a lot, helps you follow the patterns of a lot of those things for you, so that you don't have to kind of remember implementing equals properly and things like that.
I think it's probably too early for an effective Kotlin, just because there's, I don't know that, I certainly don't know what exactly is effective yet. I'm still learning Kotlin a lot, but, years down the road, if somebody kind of codifies some of the practices that, have, these are the things that you, and how you want to use Kotlin into some sort of book like that, I think it would be good. But I think that should be quite a ways down the road when we have a lot more experience with Kotlin.
Given that Kotlin is mostly based on effective Java, if someone can focus on effective Kotlin, that get the next language now. We should do that.
Yeah, we spent some time the other day with a singleton that was taking 2 parameters in Kotlin. So effective Kotlin for that would have been great. So definitely.
Yeah, effective Java is such a great resource, but also the language has, cruft from 20 years. Effective Java is 10 years old. Came out in Java 6, I guess, was the thing. And so to echo some of the points that I guess were already made, is that not only do we not know enough, but I do think there needs to be patterns like that which come out, which don't encompass an effective Kotlin, but it's just guidance. Given this situation, here's 1 or 2 options you could take, and here's the pros and cons of each. So it's not necessarily hard rules that effective Java gives, and actual pitfalls and things you should completely avoid. But providing some guidance is certainly something that I think no one would be against.
Is that aligned at all with your work, with your job?
No comment.
Okay, cool.
So, Jose,
Yep.
so one thing about it is like we are just starting to use Kotlin in apps. At some point, we're going to have big apps using Kotlin for some years, and then when the environment is mature enough, we'll figure out what is right or wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I guess we are in the process.
Awesome. So let's talk about live data, live data here, right? I can say that. With live data being an observable, do you stick with RxJava for its features, or do you move to live data for its, for the lifecycle awareness, or can you use both? And Lucia, you might want to take this one.
Yes, so I don't think we have to choose one or the other. I think both have good things, and they sort of complement each other. So RxJava has a super big toolbox with a lot of operators and transformations that we can apply. So we can use that for our business logic. But then on the other hand, the RxJava observables, are not lifecycle aware, which is exactly what live data is. It's an observable that is lifecycle aware, but it doesn't have that big pool of operators. It just has the basic ones. So I think we can use RxJava for all the business logic, as I said, and then when it comes to the areas of the code where the life cycle is important and the awareness of the life cycle should be there, then pass it to a live data. So as you see, like the strengths or the weaknesses of one are the strengths of the other. So I see them as complementary.
So you're saying live data for the presentation layer? So connection between view and view model, for example.
Up to the presentation layer, like all the business logic.
And then from view model to repository, it would start being Rx.
Yeah. I think that's a formula that works nicely.
So we shouldn't expect RxJava to be lifecycle aware because of this, right? I mean, there's no need. What do you think about that?
Well, RxJava is a Java library, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It knows nothing about Android. You can use it in other setups, not mobile. So yeah, I don't think that should be the direction.
Cool. So speaking of RxJava, we've started incorporating it in samples and libraries. We have Flowable in Room. But we do it cautiously because, well, it's a very popular library in the community, but many people say that its advantages come at a price, like hard to read code, a very steep learning curve. What do you think about this with regards to beginners starting or a big team that has like interns maybe or junior developers?
So every summer, my team grows by 50%, and that's because we take on interns. We're a fairly small team, so I'm about 25% of the time that I spend at work is explaining to people what our architecture works like, what it is, and I use RxJava for the reasons that it is easier to explain to someone. And I mean by that, I'm not very good at Java. I'm not very good at threading. I don't expect interns to have good ideas of what a threading model is or how to use threads or where you should use async tasks. And to me, RxJava tries to abstract away a lot of the pain points of Android development of trying to do background operations. That I get that the functional paradigms and all of the maps and the filtering and all the things that may not be familiar to someone, but I feel like most people can avoid that and start. I started using RxJava because Retrofit started exposing things as observables. And lo and behold, I didn't need async tasks anymore. And slowly I was able to grow from there, that I was really excited that once the architecture components are starting to be exposed or the room stuff is being exposed as RxJava, it gives you that feeling that we are on the right path as library developers and that this is a paradigm that can be used for mobile and now it is supported by Google. But obviously, be cautious. Do it with caution. It's much easier to leak. It's much easier to make problems with it and shoot yourself in the foot. And we all learned it kind of later in life, what leaking subscriptions are. But it all exists there just like any other technology. But I'm really happy that it's being embraced, and it's something that I feel does make it easier to do Android.
I think the fact that the declarative threading is one of those great things that I don't have to think about it too much and it just works. But on the other hand, it's like I see RxJava like a superpower. So you can use it, you have to have responsibility about it. Otherwise, you can have that infinite chain that never ends and you don't even know what it's doing at some point. So I think what Mike was saying is good. Otherwise, you just have to be careful.
Yeah, and I think that it also brings another dimension because when you use RxJava, it's so easy to move to a different thread. So you sort of embrace asynchronous programming, and then race conditions are super easy to make. And race conditions are not a mistake on your logic in the code. You need to add a new dimension of concurrency and thinking, what if I have, this and that thread running at the same time? And then, so I think that's when you start using Rx extensively in your code and in your architecture. At some point, you run into these problems. And yeah, sometimes it's like a nightmare to hunt them down, yeah.
I think to answer your question about if you're a newer developer, if you're just getting started or have been going for a little while, I don't think it's necessary to immediately jump into RxJava. Live data is pretty powerful, and until you need RxJava, maybe it's not worth going through the really steep learning curve just to kind of get something done.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing in that I'm glad it's being added cautiously. Even though we say it's very popular in the community, I think sometimes when we think of the community, it's just the most outspoken people or the speakers. Maybe we're all using RxJava. But when I actually talk to random Android developers, they are not using it. They don't even want to use it. They're confused when they look at RxJava code. So if you're new, you really don't need it. I've seen extremely impressive Android applications that have nothing to do with RxJava, and I think it would be a shame to include it in libraries where it's now this dependency, where if you want to use this component, well, you have to have RxJava in your app. So I would just be very cautious about adopting it and assuming the whole community is using and loving RxJava.
Seems like this is Jake's mistake.
It's nothing to do with Jake.
Speaking of Jake's mistakes,
Coming on this panel.
Dagger, very similar situation with Dagger. Also very popular. You see it everywhere, but I think I've had lots of conversations at conferences about Dagger and how people just don't understand it. Just the person on each team that basically architected the whole Dagger thing is the person, the go-to person for Dagger. But it's hard to get your head around it, right? Same question, I guess. What are your thoughts on Dagger?
Yeah, I mean, these libraries aren't adopted for no reason. And so you have to reach a certain point in the app development to require, because you can get away without RxJava and you can get away without Dagger, but it pushes a complexity burden onto you in manually having to manage threading, callbacks, or in Dagger's case, passing around dependencies and ensuring they're lazily created. And so, it's not like these things exist for no reason. At least with Dagger, there's almost no reason why that would leak into a library. And so ultimately it becomes at least an external library that you would consume. So at least in that case, it becomes a decision of your app and not something that's potentially forced on you from, I want to use library X and now I'm using RxJava. This is actually, I have a problem that I need to solve in my app, which is management of dependencies, and so I'm going to use the tool at my disposal. And I think a theme with both of the libraries is that they're not backed by a big company or even people that have lots of time to invest in the side of learning the tools. All the effort that's done on, not all, but the majority of the effort that's being done is actually improving the tool itself, making RxJava faster, have better APIs, having Dagger generate less code and be faster. And so there's definitely a theme with some of these libraries that have widespread adoption, which is that there's not a lot of good content for bringing people into that ecosystem and having, really instilling a good mental model. Because once RxJava clicks, it's the world opens up. And once Dagger clicks, it's everything becomes simpler in your mental model. it's a complex tool that ultimately makes things simpler, but you need to have that aha moment. And so that's one of the reasons why I think there's this disconnect between people that love it and then having people come into your app, whether it's interns or people starting Android in general wanting to learn these things, is that the content's not there for instilling the right mental model and just an easy ramp to get started.
Yeah, I think when you want to like invest in these technologies, you need to always think about this cost. Like you might be Jake and like you know this very well, but someone else you hire probably won't. And then you need to understand that like any time you spend on investing these technologies, someone else also needs to spend that time learning them. So unless you have an established team, like unless you know that your application will scale, you might be better off focusing on the features that you need to develop than the architecture of your application, because like if your application never makes it, like your architecture is not valuable. Like the guy who writes Rails or Ruby, one of them, like I remember seeing a talk and he talks about this. He says like, I don't think performance is a problem in Ruby, because like if it ever becomes a problem for you, that means you're like Twitter, you can rewrite it in Scala, you can hire engineers. That's like, at the end of the day, I mean, engineering is cool and fun, but like we're working for a business. So that should be the first thing on your mind, your product. Now, how do you make it better?
Yeah, so I agree with both of them in the sense of you have to get into the mindset of using RxJava and Dagger, and at some point it's like a superpower and you think like, hey, I can do this. Wow, and it's just super easy with two operators. And while normally without functional, it's like super complicated to get that great. And again, if you don't have a time constraint or resources constraint and your app is going to scale, yeah, Dagger 2 for handling dependencies is fantastic because it auto-generates readable code that you can actually program and debug, and it's compile time checking dependencies, so there is no runtime issues. So it's really great, but you just have to get everybody on the team up to the speed to understand what is going on. And if you have legacy code, you have to get that legacy code to the quality that, to understand at least your graph, and you can build the graph, right?
Right. New York Times mic. We have 3 mics here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Sell us Dagger 2 because.
Sure, Dagger 2. So
yeah, why not? Manual dependency injection? You can do it.
Absolutely, you can do it. I've never really seen no one's ever shown me an app where they're doing dependency injection manually better than Dagger does it. I know Groupon has a solution, Toothpick, which really is a smaller version of Dagger. We're trying to do the same things. I think a lot of people here are kind of arguing of whether you should be using Dagger or not, but I think there would be some agreement that you should be externalizing your dependencies and should be doing it in a way where you can test your code. So that brought me to using Dagger. I actually started from Spring being a backend developer. So I was always doing dependency injection. So I came to Android, started doing Dagger 1. It worked great. Dagger 2 came out. I thought they were crazy. It's so much more complicated. Nothing works in it. But then I started realizing why they did it. They did it for speed. They did it so your app now is not spilling water all over yourself. Let me put that down and continue. Sorry. So Dagger 2 was done for speed, and it was done when Google took it over. And what I started noticing is that now no one can make the argument anymore that Dagger is slower than what they were doing by hand. People can't make the argument that it was using reflection, and they would never use reflection on their own. So I see Dagger as one of the reasons why actually a lot of people know who I am. I always say how fast our app is, how fast our app starts up at the New York Times. And one of the big reasons it starts up fast is that we moved from Dagger 1 to Dagger 2. So there is a little more complexity and there's a little more setup, but that setup removes the slow code in Dagger. And I'm really satisfied once I realized what components are and why we need these and why we need to make our own builders. And once it all kind of clicks, you start realizing that, you know what, the code that I would have written by hand is this code. I couldn't have done it any better than this. And these guys are pushing the development. They're adding new features like multi-bindings, which are making me organize my code in a manner that I didn't even know is the right way to organize the code. So I'm just really happy that I know this was kind of like a project at Square at one point, that there's a team at Google now, and this is their full-time job to make sure that Dagger 2 is what dependency injection should be on mobile.
Cool.
Big fanboy, yep.
Can you write a book so we can also understand those things?
How many hours did you invest to
nail the dagger to thingy.
I just, anything that Jake tweets about, I just like really go home and like, I need to figure this out. He's got it. The rest of us should get this. I know it's right. I don't even know why it's right. But yeah, it got me this far, so you know.
Keep tweeting. Keep tweeting, Jake.
Jake Wharton effect. So let's switch to testing. We architect the apps so that they're as testable as possible, but what's your ideal testing approach? Michael, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So we started kind of down the road of with a lot of instrumentation tests, espresso tests, and we've gotten a lot of value out of that. But I think, especially with architecture components, I think it lends itself easier to JVM testing, which has a lot of advantages. You can run them quicker. You don't have to install a whole APK. You don't have to build a whole APK, which now you're with instrumentation tests you're building too. So you definitely want to, as much as you can, test a lot of the edge cases and logic through your JVM tests. You can save yourself a lot of time. But I still find a bit of value in espresso tests. You just don't want to. You don't want to overdo it, because if you're testing every little variation in espresso tests, I mean it's gonna add up quickly. So
and being specific, do you do end-to-end tests? You unit test your activities? Do you test for the happy flow user flows?
Yeah, so we with an espresso test, we'll try to at least do one happy flow where it's testing what happens in the happy case and one arrow flow with the espresso test. Sometimes we'll go beyond that and test even more with espresso, but that makes sure that your activities will actually come up. Your things will get injected properly. It just makes sure that everything's coming together. But at the unit test level, we don't really try to test activities and things like that. It's more testing one class at a time or one method at a time. And how that interacts with the other modules. Some of the things that we've run into is some of the APIs like Fingerprint and others. You have to write your own fake implementations to be able to keep yourself not too dependent on actual hardware. Like if you had to automate fingerprint, you can't actually have somebody touching the fingerprint sensor. So you have to provide a fake implementation where you can virtually touch the sensor and some things like that. So, don't be afraid to write your own fake implementations of Android APIs to help you in your automation.
I think, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but all of the topics leading up to this question emphasize strong patterns that enable testability. So dependency injection and version of control. By nature, RxJava, you can take any observable and swap it with a fake one that has similar behavior for tests. The architecture components obviously are built around creating nice separation of concern and abstractions that have boundaries that are easily testable. And so there's a reason that we're here talking about all these things over and over again at these conferences. And it's not only because it enables you to write your app better, but it also enables testing. And then one last thing, Google has a testing blog, which has really great content about how to test, because Google has like billions of tests, and they have people that spend their full time making sure tests work correctly. And so there's years of history on this Google testing blog, and I would highly recommend checking it out.
Okay, so I can talk a little bit about the setup in N26, what
Yep.
we do. So what we do is we focus on unit testing a lot. So we try to get the fragment activity code as simple as possible. And unit test all the business logic. So we trust the framework is going to do things right, basically. And then the QA team writes some automated integration tests. So it's end-to-end, like with nothing is mocked, it's hitting the real backend. And we use Appium for that. But in this test, we are testing the happy path. So like nothing crazy, not trying to find like edge cases or anything. That's why we do the unit test. And so far it's working fine for us.
All right, cool. I've been shown the red card. So last question. Let's go from Yiğit to Jake. One activity per app, one activity per screen, One activity in multiple fragments or multiple activities in multiple fragments? Let's go. Just mention your preference. Don't need to expand on it.
It depends.
I forgot to say, you can't say it depends. Just pick one.
I don't.
You must say fragments. You're gonna be the only one saying fragments.
Otherwise, like Adam Powell is my boss. So fragments everywhere, all the time, forever.
Okay.
I don't care what you use, just don't use fragments.
Wow. Harsh.
I'm more into one activity per flow, which could have one or more fragments.
All right.
One activity with a screen, simple, just do it, just works.
Cool.
And life cycle, live data, view model, boom.
Can't say it depends. I think one activity per screen and maybe fragments, but one activity per screen for sure.
Generally, I do one activity per screen, although I think that there's probably a lot of interesting things about having one activity per flow and having less view hierarchies, especially when you're doing something like Espresso. It makes things easier not to have a new view hierarchy every time you pop up a new screen.
One activity per screen and sometimes fragments.
One activity for the whole app. You can use fragments, just don't use the backstack of fragments, because it's bad.
Awesome. So that's all we had time for. I hope this generated more answers than questions. So yeah, see you next time, and thank you to all our speakers.